out here looking at all of these Docker containers and we dive into something like the coding challenge, and you're going to see what looks like a pretty typical and behaves like a pretty typical microservice environment where each of these are hosted running, endpoints that have their own databases, and some of these are known kind of in advance to the system. So like financial and account might be known to some of these other systems. They're welcome to kind of talk to one another. Could easily add an event bus. I have, I've got to move on with our time. And if we walk by it, then we'll know for sure. Right. Now, one of the things you and I look at periodically is these are right now delivered through kind of a mono repo, micro application, lazy loaded, half code generated architecture. It's its own beast. But instead, there's a kind of a separation between how we build it and kind of ignorance, but appropriateness for separate from how we deploy it. And if you wanted to break this into 80 different project repos and put them all out there in different GitHubs and give them all their different life cycles, you could, but until such a point as any desire to build new features kind of has you touching everything, right? Like that during the beginning of a project is really important. Our ability to flush and fill and recycle and completely kind of craft what we're up to. And then over time, you start to find, well, what we're really here doing is expanding the TCL mod. So let's go ahead and pull this stuff out into a repo. And it's kind of got its own easy, there's this one folder you're going to grab and you're going to move it all out, and then it'll come back into where it needs to as a NuGet package library or from your Artifactory binary repository or wherever it is you desire to tuck. And now that thing can be published in its own life cycle, um, and changed willy-nilly, and which I think you already kind of give for free anyway. So I don't know. Let's investigate. What I really hope we do is look at how traffic comes in. Um, all of these things are kind of listening on 443 and 80, so to speak. We'll see how that plays out. And, there's the marketing websites, and there's the main web application, and there's the security login system, and there's exposed APIs, SignalR server, everything a person might need to operate an application of any size. So let's look
Oh,
at.
oh,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, on the 443, you said everything comes in on that, and you can have them all coming in on that at the same time.
Yes. Well, you'd have to, right? Um, most, even where you're working a lot with cloud, right? Most of those services and containers are like, hey, you can have traffic on 80 or 443. You can't have anything else. We're not going to open more ports.
Okay.
So at some exposed moment, you have to be able to listen on 443. And for us, we have this little pet project called Cerberus. And Cerberus is responsible for taking all of our work and getting it redirected internally. If you notice, these are all listening on internal ports only. So these applications aren't even available, right, so to speak, unless you've gone through Cerberus. And if you were to get somehow to Cerberus in a weird way, it's really just this one single deployed nginx box that's very boring, and the rest of these are back isolated on their own networks. So if we look at traffic as it comes in, Cerberus is actually responsible for bringing that traffic in, terminating all SSL certs, and then all of these are then spoken to internally over local ports,
Nice.
which means they all share a security network, and we'll kind of see that. So there's like an internal network that we've created and made available that all of these can participate in. And again, that could be further isolated, with another layer, and you can maintain vast empires and good times. So if we look at how this actually comes to be, we're going to start with Cerberus. And Cerberus, starting at the very highest levels, is just one nginx server with a configuration that we maintain. And then each of the projects themselves maintain their own configuration that is injected, just like the script is written in, you can imagine. And here we describe all of the redirects to those internal Docker containers by their Docker container name. Again, keeping the flow of traffic very internal to what you'll need to set up as a larger Docker environment, such as Docker Swarm or Kubernetes, or what you're going to see. We're just really abusing Docker Compose and pulling the whole thing off, and it's quite lovely. It meets our needs. If you wanted to have multiple containers handling traffic for a single exposed endpoint, you can even use a little poor man um, round robin. I think it uses load balancing, and that's super
And
cool. Anyway, you get
that's
all
pretty
the
nice.
pieces you need. And all of this then comes together in a Docker Compose, and here's that network that this group of things relies on being available. So if you were to reinstall Docker, for instance, you'd have to recreate that network. It's a little one-liner. You'll find it throughout the READMEs. All right. So we're going to listen on 443, and if we look at our actual definition of our nginx endpoint, we see everybody's listening on 443. Nginx will then iterate through all of those endpoints trying to find a match, and you'll provide a default. Now, the SSL certs and keys and certificates, pretty obnoxious. You'll go buy yourself a wildcard SSL cert because you need to protect all those different subweb endpoints. You'll initiate the request, get your SSL cert, complete the request, take that PFX output, and need to create keys and CRT files out of it to store on your server. Then also, like we mentioned, this is how hard it is to create that private network so all the projects can reference it. And we have ourselves some Jenkins. Everybody loves some Jenkins, so we're able to speak directly to Jenkins about how to process the building of and creation and teardown of our Docker Compose files. All right, so let's get out of Cerberus. Cerberus is just routing traffic, as we talked, and then a typical project for us will come down, and in our Docker Compose, we're essentially doing the same. We tend to use these user secrets. Could easily replace this with like Azure secrets or whatever your environment best supports. For us, we have one Jenkins server, and it's private, and so we just store these together. Um, Works for us. Get you down the road pretty fast. And
Sure.
then we name a shared base image. So if we start looking, we organize all of this conversation up as we can in a build folder in the root. And our shared base is going to be this enormous, obnoxious everything. And then if you were to tear out and go into your own, like pull the project out of the mono repo, you just take your chunk of stuff with you as you go. And we have a shared blazor base so that we can go ahead and run on npm. Why did we need npm for? I think this might not be needed anymore. We used to need some npm to regenerate the SAS files, SASS and SCSS down into CSS files, but
Right.
we've replaced that, so I reckon I could gut this out. Then each module, we talked about some required ones that everybody knows about and some ones that can be lazily injected. For the parts that need Docker containerized, like an API endpoint here needs to be runnable or running, then we continue the game by creating the build script for Docker container that can host its own nginx reverse proxy that Cerberus is then going to point to. And because these are also very patterned, we can do some pretty wide sweeping changes or expansions or create new modules or new projects that do all of this stuff out of the box, which is quite helpful, and most of it can be kind of reimagined the flick of the wrist. So that's very lovely. The rest of this just gets cooked into libraries and stuff. So most of it isn't very interesting. If you did take it out, then you would cook that library to NuGet. And again, there are examples, unless I've completely removed them. I don't see evidence here of cooking to a NuGet file. But they're in the library and available. So this local API project, I'll quit dancing around here, is going to cook into a container that is listening on port 7991 internally. And if we follow that conversation back up then, right, then we're going to see here on the Docker Compose side how to spin up that container that is we were just looking at. And again, locally expose it on 7991. Back out to Cerberus. We see Docker container name 7991 port maps upstream to this server block, which gets you your SSL termination and your internal redirect to the HTTP, the reverse proxy settings, which vary a little bit for Identity Server and SignalR, and we could do even more here, as you can see, with further tightening down some of the course settings and some of these fun things. I don't know if that was useful. I just think people might struggle to understand how to flow your common 443 traffic and 80 traffic into a system and then distribute it out to its various API endpoints and other needful running types of things like SignalR servers or identity servers. The whole caboodle is here, and it makes me very
I think
happy.
one of the big advantages of going over that is when you're not using Docker, when you're not using all of these the separate standalone tools like this, right? When you're working in the cloud, which is where I spend most of my time. So much of this stuff is kind of automated for you. You don't really know what's happening behind the scenes,
Okay.
right? And so, kind of seeing this, it helps understand what's happening behind the scenes. That's actually pretty cool to see the manual side of it as opposed to all of the automated stuff that's done in the cloud.
Why does it feel like an IBM and an Apple commercial and somehow I'm
Right?
IBM? Fair
But
enough. Let me
we're
think
not
about what you've said for a few minutes.
we're not competing with each other.
Said Apple. Um, all right, so fair. When I come here and hit run, air quotes, I could do this in big VS Studio and you'd be happier probably. And again, you wouldn't see any of this, right? So I'm about to do the same
Right.
thing. So when you hit play, often what you mean is, oh yeah, turn on identity and make sure that's been built and published, which you'll probably get for free, but there's a reason. And then run my SignalR server, and then I'd like to do at least open the folder to Blazor client. We're not running anything right now, but do run the server and turn on watchers because I want to watch for changes there, and then run all of these API endpoints and turn on watchers, and here's all the reports and blah blah blah, blah 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 blah. How the sausage is made, I suppose. Here, just little convenience folders if I want to do anything with like a .NET EF database update or drop or migrations add, or this is where all that lives. So I open these folders up for handy sake. All the projects are here and they're all running in whatever way I want them to. If we wanted to add a new migrations, we've got cute little batch files that live everywhere that can torch migrations and start over. Add a new migration where it'll go figure out what increment you're on and add you a fresh one and give it a name. And if you want to delete your database and start fresh, you can do this reapply. This will also run all the static data, seed data, and run through some amount of testing data, create migration. Oh, anyway, lovely to have those folders open, which, if you're in big VS, would be funny. Now, all of this gets you, right, a running website. Fair. It's going to move me on over to the local, right? This is all driven by the user secrets files, and so it's all smart about where it is, and all mashes into the normal app config flow. And it knows it's in development, so we're running all localhost stuff. Maybe. Now we're back to app.thecodingchallenge.com. Now this thing on the background is calling those various, there's your 7991 endpoint. It's not going to let me play along because it doesn't know I'm logged in or not because I hit the API without the website where
Sure.
the JWT would go with me, which is a good thing, I reckon. Some of these aren't that way, so this one, in fact, I can hit without being logged in, so to speak. Which you've seen. And just that is the TCL mod.thecodingchallenge.com, but when it behaves on localhost. So it feels like the best of both worlds. I'm in total control of and can easily play along with running and debugging all 90 projects. I don't know. Let's
Yeah,
count.
and the total control of, that's the point I was trying to make a while ago, is that earlier, is that while I'm very comfortable with what I do in the cloud, and I've gotten pretty good at it over the years, um, I do lose some of the control that you have here with everything you're doing, and I think I kind of miss that from way back in the day because I won't call myself a control fanatic, but I do like to know what's going on behind the scenes, and you definitely get more of that here than you would on the cloud.
So there are 83 projects, good or bad.
Wow.
Uh, and this is a tiny little build. This
Right.
is so there you go. We've seen how to have containers. All of this, I could collapse the whole world, and we could not have anything, and we could do
Sure.
Docker compose build. If Docker were running. Well, there you go. It's gonna take a little bit of time here to stand up the empire, and we can keep talking about how this would be different in the cloud. It's probably a little faster. All of this for us runs on one big beautiful server that we can remote into, as you saw.
Yeah, I was going to
Makes me
say
old school.
it may spin up a little faster in the cloud, but as you and I've talked about before, you pay for that, right? You're making judgment calls on what kind of control you want and where you want your cost to be.